Argentina has suffered multiple occasions of default. आप जाइए economics पढ़ने तो always remember its political economy. Vision of भुट्टो रोटी कपड़ा मकान वो लोगों से जाता नहीं. So it is completely wrong, I think, that the people cannot take long-term decisions. The politicians are always looking for the easy solution. And the easiest solution is that, well, the people will not accept. In reality, how much of tariff dramatically fall for the end consumer products?
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। प्राइम की एक स्पेशल एपिसोड और पॉडकास्ट के साथ आज दोबारा आपके साथ हम मिल रहे हैं। आज हम बुनियादी तौर पर डिस्कस करेंगे पाकिस्तान की इकोनॉमी को नहीं करेंगे, बल्कि पाकिस्तान से बाहर की दुनिया में क्या कुछ हो रहा है, स्पेशली अर्जेंटीना की इकोनॉमी और इकोनॉमिक चेंजेस को हम डिस्कस करेंगे। आज से तकरीबन 2 साल पहले वहाँ पर एक प्रेसिडेंट मिले इलेक्ट हुए और उसके बाद से उन्होंने बहुत सारी चेंजेस की हैं इकोनॉमी के अंदर, पब्लिक लॉज के अंदर, रेगुलेशंस के अंदर। और ये कहा जाता है कि वो इस वक्त एक तरह से जो लिबर्टेरियन आइडियोलॉजी है उसको भी रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं इन द गवर्नमेंट। हाइकियन स्कूल ऑफ थॉट है और वो अपने आप को अनार्को कैपिटलिस्ट भी कहते हैं। और इन सारे आइडियाज़ को वो अब अर्जेंटीना में इम्प्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं। अर्जेंटीना को शुमार एक वक्त में दुनिया की मोस्ट प्रॉस्पेरस इकोनॉमीज़ में होता था अप टिल 1950s, और उसके बाद से फिर उसका एक सिग्निफिकेंट डाउनफॉल शुरू हुआ। और अब अनफॉर्चुनेटली जिस तरह पाकिस्तान एक वन ऑफ द मोस्ट IMF डिपेंडेंट कंट्रीज़ है, उस तरह अर्जेंटीना भी बन चुका है। लेकिन अब 2 सालों में क्या चेंजेस आई हैं, आज हम इसके मुतालिक बात करेंगे। और आज हम बात करेंगे, जावेद हसन हमारे साथ हैं। थैंक यू जावेद साहब फॉर ज्वाइनिंग दिस पॉडकास्ट। जावेद साहब का ताल्लुक इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग से है, रिटायर्ड इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर, मगर देन ही हैज़ बीन फॉर मैनी ईयर्स writing on economic issues very extensively, and also he has been on different platforms. Javed and I also set up economic advisory group about 4 years ago, which has had been a great success, and Javed was the founding chair.
Thank you.
Of EAG, which was a very significant contribution in actually the economic discourse in Pakistan. And I'm glad to have you back.
Actually.
And looking forward to a discussion today. तो जावेद साहब, आपने अभी रिसेंटली आर्टिकल भी लिखा मिले के इकोनॉमिक एक्सपेरिमेंट के ऊपर, and you were actually critical of certain policies. But before we come to that part, I wanted you to explain the whole development of his economic reforms. Especially when we talk about the size of the government, all public spending, fiscal crisis, how he created a budget surplus from a 9% fiscal deficit to GDP. Now is a budget surplus country, and regulations have been thoroughly sort of done away with or significantly changed. Exchange controls abolished, import controls lifted, price controls abolished. All that thing, all those things have been done. So give us some perspective of where Argentina is today.
I think it's fair to say that basically Milei, when he came about, the country was in a severe crisis. And there's no better time for a person like Milei to come into power. Jab crisis itna zyada ho ke there is 155% inflation. In fact, some numbers, it went up to, peaked at 211%.
211%
inflation. The balance, the fiscal deficits in 2020 was 6%. That was the primary deficit. The fiscal deficit overall was around 8.9%. That had come down to 2023 to around the primary fiscal deficit to around 2.7%, overall fiscal deficit to about 4.7%. But, for a country which was continuously indebted, and continuously under strain, those kind of burden of having to have maintained such a large deficit payment was putting considerable strain on its currency. And consequently, we saw a dramatic fall of currency in 2023, which actually meant that the debt to GDP ratio, which was hovering around 85%, went up to 155%.
So let me just stop you. This currency depreciation was before Milei came into power in December?
There was already a severe currency sway taking place.
Okay.
And then, but there was the more dramatic, there was pressure on the currency, but that when Milei came in, there was the 43% devaluation. Milei had a almost classic example of where a country is crisis because of an extended bureaucracy, hugely regulation, currency regulations, as well as price controls, as you mentioned, plus unions, very strong unions, all of that with typical almost, वो कहते हैं Peronists, but it more like socialist economies. And where there was no sign, it was the sick country of Latin America. Many of the Latin American countries, agar aap soche, Mexico, Brazil, have gradually reformed, even if the reforms have not been perfect.
Chile
is probably the best example of reform, where it's now in the sort of middle income to relatively high income economies. Argentina used to be way ahead of Chile at one point.
True.
Now it's probably considerably behind.
And if I just can interrupt you, historically speaking, it was interesting that within the economic system था Argentina का 1950 के बाद जो Peronist regime थी, उन्होंने पूरा ट्रेड यूनियंस का एक नेटवर्क बनाया और एक गिल्ड सिस्टम बनाया, और वो एक तरह से एक पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम ऐसा था जिसके अंदर ये सारी स्टेट इंटरवेंशन वाज एट द पीक, जिसके नतीजे में फिर ये हर जगह एक स्टेट के भी इन्वॉल्वमेंट आई, रेगुलेटरी इंटरवेंशन भी बढ़ी, और ये जो अब हम देख रहे हैं ये कम्प्लीटली उस सिस्टम को एक तरह से वो
अगर सोचें जो जनरल पेरोन थे, Eva Peron के husband, which is Eva Peron, everyone knows more famously. But General Peron is a real person who had wielded the power.
Right.
And he had a program which was very populist. And was one of the key measures was, it is interesting, it was what was called the new housing, the Naya Ghar Wahabita. And that was...
Sounds so familiar. Everything that you're saying is very, very...
I know, but that was really interesting, where the government was going to provide housing, which was going to compare with lifestyles in California to the public. Is that? I'm not kidding. And that was the start of the sort of crisis. And because of that, indebtedness went up from a country which was relatively prosperous. You basically saw a dramatic fall in the sort of economic performance. You had more and more control of the state. Once the state starts providing things like not only jobs, which is bad enough, but housing, then it has a huge ability to interfere. I mean, one of the reasons why Hayek was so opposed to this kind of interference of state control in terms of housing or even welfare, other than basics like education and health, which I think are imperative, no matter how strongly we believe in Hayekian views. But the age of housing and jobs and state control of industry is that the state actually impinges on your political freedoms, because it can decide ki kisko ghar de, kisko nahi ghar de. But it also then imposes a huge cost in terms of your fiscal ability to fund that kind of provisioning. So वो जो हुआ Argentina में, from there on, it sort of blew up the budgets, it blew up the balance sheet of the country. It had to borrow internationally. Its sort of debt to international debt to GDP went up from relatively low levels of sort of 20, 30% to as high as at 1.70%. And in 2020, it was 70%. And So it made it very susceptible to currency fluctuations, to currency flows. So for that reason, you had to impose currency restrictions. There have been numerous occasions where the government had to not only stop banks from issuing notes with your own deposit, but also literally controlling all deposits. So people's foreign exchange were an experience we've had in Pakistan, which also happened in Argentina, ke aapke bas zabt ho gaye, literally. Not only that, Argentina has suffered multiple occasions of default.
Right.
And that
Which we have not.
we thankfully have, probably in real terms, technically some say
We have announced it.
we have not announced it. Argentina has announced it, and
More than once.
yeah, that's the issue, and because of that, it has had an element of restructuring, but not full restructuring. It has been bailed out and again and again. So basically, a basket case, to put it.
It's a basket case.
Yeah,
It was.
and in that way, it was. And I hate to say so. I mean, this seems extremely cruel because these are real lives.
Yeah.
We're talking about people suffer, and we'll get on to that. Okay,
Capitalists are known as cruel people.
it is true, but yeah, I think capitalists also need to be aware that if you are too cruel, it has its own political implications, which doesn't allow you to. But it was a basket case and the perfect state for a libertarian like Milei to come and bring about reforms. So that's where we are with high budget deficit,
Right.
High level of international indebtedness, inflation through the roof.
I'm very interested. I think the way you अपने जो लैंडस्केप एक तरह से ड्रॉ किया है, एक बात मेरे दिन में ये आती है कि व्हाट हैपेंड, ये जो IMF का आपने जिक्र किया, सो IMF का और इंटरनेशनल इंडेप्टनेस का भी जिक्र किया, और उसमें हमने देखा कि बार बार अर्जेंटीना IMF के पास गया और कितने इन्होंने प्रोग्राम्स किए हैं. गालिबन ये 3 मुल्क हैं, पाकिस्तान, इजिप्ट एंड अर्जेंटीना, जो कि IMF के वो एक तरह से
चुंगल में फंसे.
हाँ फंसे हुए. और लेकिन ये कि अर्जेंटीना उससे बाहर नहीं आ सका. मतलब ये कि जो ये आपने डेट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग की बात कर ली, और आपने एक आर्टिकल पहले भी कुछ अर्से पहले लिखा था, आई थिंक डेट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग की आपने फेवर किया था.
बिल्कुल.
और मुझे याद है, it was a great article, and then you are saying that this happened also here. ज़ाहिर पाकिस्तान में भी आए हुए हैं. आज हम पाकिस्तान के मतलब डायरेक्टली बात नहीं कर रहे, लेकिन वो ज़ाहिर है
उन्होंने भी डेट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग इफेक्टिवली करा था 2003 में.
वो करा था एग्जैक्टली. तो ये IMF के बार बार प्रोग्राम्स के बावजूद अर्जेंटीना क्यों नहीं उस पाथ पे आ सका, यानी रिफॉर्म्स के पाथ पे आ सका?
आई थिंक वो जो discipline है, economic discipline, which is in the end we have to remember, and जब आप जाइए economics पढ़ने, तो always remember it's political economy. Economics is not a pure science,
Right.
and in the end the politics always intervenes. There has been Menem tried to bring about reforms, but then he became a populist as well.
Right.
And he gave in, and the leader before Milei also completely abandoned any sort of restraint. So they went into sort of default restructuring. There's some intention of actually doing the right things, and then given the sort of constraints of the politics, there was a lapse. So if you want to put it in a crude way, and we have none of those in Pakistan, because they were lapsed alcoholics.
At least not publicly.
Again and again. So they made promises not to.
No, that's very important. I think the political economy की आपने बात की. I think that's where the ultimately.
And there is a strong, and this is one of the things that we can't ignore. There's a romanticism to it. The Peronists, and given the whole sort of glamour that surrounds Eva Peron and Juan Peron, that they were the great friends of the people. that Peronist ideals is very deeply embedded in society. If you want to think in corollary in Pakistan, is that vision of Bhutto, Roti Kapra Bakan, वो लोगों से जाता नहीं.
Say,
एक दफा वो so and there has
presented as like a populist, people-loving, people welfare.
and it's supposed to be essentially the goodness of government is in taking care of the people.
Right.
Now we haven't had that, and I think Milei was probably the closest thing of a Thatcherite. You had that post-war in Britain as well, where you had this sort of socialist welfare state, and it was in some ways very remarkably successful. But then again, the early 80s, it failed, and you had Thatcher and Reagan, who that major reform, and if you want to think it, I think they were the precursors to someone like a Milei, where you had this major shift away from your political idea of what the state has to do. And they had the ability to connect with the people, especially Reagan, and a clear economic vision. Before taking power, it seemed that Milei also had that clear economic vision. I mean, very dramatically with his chainsaw on stage, where he said he'll cut through the...
And interestingly, he is not belonging to a political class.
And that's one of the best things.
He completely is someone like Donald Trump in a way, right?
Yeah.
Completely coming from a non-political background.
Bilkul.
Entering the first, he was a member of the Congress, but then he ran for the president. And then the good thing is the system allowed such people to actually run for top leadership.
Wonderful things about the whole aspect of how Milei came into power, and I'm going to come to the critical part later, but is that he came through not through the power of the gun or some imposition.
True.
He came through a democratic election.
That's true.
And despite his measures, everyone knowing how tough they would be, and that's the view that people think that ordinary people cannot vote for tough measures. People voted for him. So he came through democratic process, people fully knowing that,
Very important.
that he was going to impose considerable hardship, and we're going to talk about the hardship. So it is completely wrong, I think, that the people cannot take long-term decisions. And in Argentina, the classic case, people were taking a long-term bet that we will suffer in the short term. We are willing to take that hardship for the long term, and I would say the same happened in Britain to a certain extent, with Reagan in America, where ordinary people, not only the elite, not only the business classes, ordinary people, because you can't have the elite and business classes more than 3 or 4% of the society. It is the ordinary people who voted their bent. And with a view that, yes, we will face considerable hardships, some of our benefits will be taken away, our union membership will be constrained, pensions will be cut, all of that. Despite that, they were willing. So I think it's a lesson for all of us that one can't simply say that, don't discount the people and never be able to tell the people the truth, that things are bad, and for the short term you'll have. The one thing that has to happen, though, is that the share of pain has to be equally taken by all sections of society. And this is where some of the things we can possibly talk about.
Let's talk about that. And I think this is a brilliant insight. I'll just rephrase that is what you're saying is that good economics can also be presented as good politics. So
undoubtedly.
Here is someone who presented his manifesto very clearly.
Yeah.
And that was not at all a populist manifesto. It was very, reform-oriented, significant changes. And as you mentioned, he put things very clearly. And then and also I think, interestingly, it's also a very unique position. Like he's trained as an economist, but he's like also trained as a media, on media person. Like, so that means that he was able to popularize the narrative, his story.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I mean, this is one of the things in the society that you greatly admire, and to a certain extent, I have some sympathy for Montpellier. Of course, it's where one of the whole discussion is how do we counter the left-wing message and actually embed these ideas in the people.
That's very important. I think unless we can do that, there can't be any widespread acceptance for these ideas. And even, frankly, the politicians can take a sort of, refuge in this notion that, look, people are not supposed.
Well, that's it. That's what happened. The politicians are always looking for the easy solution. And the easiest solution is that, well, the people will not accept and they'll revolt against it.
Okay, let me just put it directly. So what would you have expected someone like Milei to actually go through reforms process? And where do you think it's gone right? Where do you think he has gone not so right? So in terms of pure economics.
Let's talk about the things he did right.
Right.
I mean, let's give him the credit where it's right. And I think, one of the things which a typical Hayekian libertarian monetarist would be worried, concerned of, is big governments, large government. And I know people try and shy away from it, but let's call it the Levantine government. We need to, that is just unacceptable. And we, everywhere, anyway, while there's a certain minimum requirement for governments, some basic facilities, but on the whole, governments all over the world have become very large, very unwieldy, and they're taking up more and more of the public space. And in the case of Argentina, there was, governments, there were 18 ministries where we're looking at the most basic things, art history, and most ridiculous things which private sector could do, provision of social welfare, much beyond just the basic safety net. Then you have restrictions on pricing on various basic essentials that they were restricted. Then you had also currency controls, which really distorted the pricing of, which I think is the main asset, which is your currency. That's the largest asset in any country. And you also had large interference by unions, which also interfered in the politics in terms of determining who the candidates could be from the different sides. There also was interference in terms of media. You had large public sector involvement in the media. So I think when he came, he basically, with a chainsaw, one of the first things he did was cut down the number of, which was his first thing. He cut down the number of ministries from 18 to 9, literally with a chainsaw, you will say.
And then you say cut down. Actually, it was cut down. It was not packaged.
No, the reason is not, it was not superficial, because 70,000 people were laid out in the bill.
70,000.
Which is quite large for a country like. And so that was initially, and more were let go subsequently. So there was a severe cut down of the bureaucratic ministries were just closed, and there were ones that shifted to other ministries. By and large, they were not. Similarly, the powers of unions were severely curtailed. Price controls of all the basic commodities were removed overnight. He did also one thing, was depreciated the currency precisely, you could correct me if I'm around 43%.
Right.
And revalued the peso, or devalued the peso, I should say, and then sort of was involved in other sort of less measures. The one thing which we're going to cut down, but we'll save it for a bit later, which it just devalued the currency. The currency was already, given that you had inflationary pressures, running from anything from 100% to 150% over the last couple of years. You had a significant, and with a fixed pricing for pay, you had a significantly overvalued currency.
Right.
So what he did was 43% devaluation. उसके बाद उसने कहा कि every month 2% होगा.
And where this 2% come from?
This arbitrarily, there was a name given, Cambrero, or something. So it was a sort of, it has been tried in other Latin American countries as well, rather than go for the whole hog. So interestingly, because of the sort of fiscal discipline and cutting of government spending, fiscal deficits came down very dramatically. That is you have to give him credit, from running primary fiscal deficit in 2023 of 2.7% and overall fiscal deficit of 4.6%. In 2024, you had a primary surplus for the first time, I don't know, after however many years, of 2.1% and an overall fiscal surplus of 0.4%.
True.
Now, that really gave people a lot of hope. You also saw, in the current year also, you're still seeing a primary surplus and potentially. So that was an early sign that things are working. Similarly, poverty, which had gone up to about 52%, and because jobs were lost and people were not relocated. But as things adjusted, job losses were curtailed, people found new avenues for income, poverty level also came back down to around 33% or 32%. So you saw that early results, and no one can deny that.
एक चीज में ऐड करना चाहूँगा. I was reading some numbers और उसमें एक बड़ा interesting था कि the credit to the public sector from the banks was slashed to zero.
Wow.
So the banks are no more lending to the public sector, which is like huge thing. और उसके साथ ही जो आपकी monetary growth है वो भी significantly नीचे चलेगी.
इसीलिए आपकी जो inflation है,
और inflation
by mid 2025, by around June 2025, came down to around 35%.
लेकिन ये कि inflation उस तरह नहीं गई अभी भी annually it was still
Well,
quite
we are going to come to that. We are saving the reasons why I've written a critical article rather than as you imagine. But we'll save that for a bit more.
Yeah, let's talk about. I mean, we can go to the currency markets and then we can talk about the inflation.
Okay, so inflation came down, but you still had inflation around 1.9%.
This is 1.9 is month to month.
Yeah.
Annual,
every month you are monthly 1.9.
Yeah. The annual is above 30%.
35%.
35, which is still quite high.
And that's the problem.
Why is that problem?
Because fundamentally you have an overvalued currency, which remains overvalued. You started off with an overvalue. When you did a 43% depreciation or devaluation, you started off with that overvalued currency. And if you then have almost every month 1.9%, and you're just devaluing to keep in line with that inflation, effectively what you're not too sure, you're basically not allowing the market to determine the shift.
But what could have been done? Like, what is the counterfactual here?
Okay, so then what we came. Then he said, okay, fine. In April of 2025, he went and completely removed any controls on currency.
Oh, the currency.
So rather than the 2% and, devaluation, said no, none of that.
So 2% is also gone.
Half. But he did something really foolish.
Okay.
He said he started then involving the state bank or the central bank there to manage the currency so that it didn't devalue. Promises were much bigger than what was done. So on many aspects, he did actually meet those promises. But then on the critical thing, which is currency, and I think that is the most critical thing, he was willing. And the reason probably, and who will guess about this, the reason was that the pain probably inflicted if he had allowed the currency to go completely would have been far more severe.
You mean devaluation?
Devaluation, say, to 70% or 80% or whatever.
He sort of controlled that.
Yeah, and allow that to 2% rather than... And effectively, the currency didn't devalue to its real. The markets then have responded. And the markets waited for a bit. The markets then responded when he lost a municipal or provincial government election. And he said, my God, if he's losing even elections, and there's a major election going to take place for the parliament, I think, in this month, that how will he actually go about making the complete reform? And that too with central bank intervening to maintain currency prices. Central bank was intervening. It was using up whatever. This is IMF is funding it to keep going.
So IMF is back.
Yeah, so the IMF money is being used to support the currency. See, it's irony. I mean, there was, and I'm kind of surprised how even IMF allowed that. But again, these are sort of political decisions, strategic decisions, and it became so severe that at one point, I think over a few days, peso devalued by 10% because the pressure
In one day.
the pressure was so severe, and there was threat, there was danger that it would just slide, and his whole entire plan was, and given the elections that he'd do, that inflation will spike up again, and then what happened was basically America has intervened because of his alignment with Trump, and they have said they'll give a $20 billion bailout program to support the currency. Now, this is real. If you're going to rely on bailouts, then how different are you to a...
Bailouts तो पहले भी हो रहे थे Argentina.
So how different are you? And so it's either politics or the lack of clarity of vision. It's difficult to say, given that he is quite attuned to libertarian economics.
So, and that's probably also where I think that the point where you initially started, like the politics. कि अभी elections की बात आप भी कर रहे थे, और थोड़ा सा ये कि he wants to survive more. So अगर ये शुरू में ही, अभी तो 2 साल उसको hardly हुए, so you would like to see his more time in the office, and sort of he is buying time, but he can do it like tomorrow. He can do what you are saying tomorrow. Don't do it.
Well, I think he's not. I mean, given that he is getting money from
The US.
why are you getting that money? It's obviously to bolster the currency.
Right.
The signal that
of course
is you're sending is my view is fine. Then it's okay. This is terrible. Markets have reacted. I'll let the currency go.
And there are other numbers which shown, I think that this make the same point in terms of market confidence. You were talking about FDI numbers. If you look at the FDI numbers in last 2 years, they really have shown anemic.
See, this is where I think once you got the currency wrong, the signal sent was, look, they're there, but they're not fully there. And moreover, if I think the currency still has another 30-40% to devalue, do I want to bring in my dollars or yuan or...
So any investor would hold back.
Would hold back.
Right? Because they would expect a devaluation 2 years down. So whatever investment would lose.
One of the things, and sorry, I'll bring that with respect to Pakistan, whatever reform you want to do, and whether it's tariff reform or...
You're not happy with the tariff reforms?
Not really. My point, if you want to do it like a zabab, do it today.
Okay.
ये नहीं करो कि
You're talking like a fundamentalist.
अगर करना है करो, नहीं करना है, then you were never there and you'll suffer the consequences. So I think the investor is quite sensitive to this, and we can talk later about the Pakistani tariff row. You send us of policy uncertainty. You actually embed it in what you're doing. So given that he was hesitant, he was then defending the currency, having been such a proponent of, I will dollarize the economy and I will not ever, I'll get rid of the central bank. All of a sudden, you're using the central banks to defend the currency. If you can let go on that very central plank, what else will you let go on in a matter of time for political expedience?
Right.
And you basically, if you see the numbers, you were getting around 2022 about 2.4% of GDP. Then it went up to 3.7. I think we have to be careful about it because that was GDP had already sort of fallen, and so it was a denominator effect. But what you're seeing now, as a percentage of GDP, FDI has fallen from sort of 2.4 it went up to 3.7 in 23. Now it's down to, in 2024, it was down to 1.8. So you didn't have this international investor coming and saying, we are going to, despite deregulation, despite putting a large number of minerals and assets for sale, despite encouraging international investors to come and say, we'll sell everything. Why wasn't it happening? Because there was fundamentally uncertainty inbuilt in your currency. What will happen? We bring in dollars, invest, tomorrow it falls by 20%. And in fact, it's a great pity, because what you then do is, one of the things, if you had taken that leap of faith, that brave decision and take the pain, you would have signaled, okay, now the worst is over, we have taken the tough decision, now you come, you would have actually got the bounce, a much bigger bounce, and the FDI itself would have walked you away from a number of problems. That would have served as your great savior.
Yeah. And, unless, of course, now we have this US $20 billion rescue package, IMF. You were saying that if the currency markets were in the right shape, then FDI would have made up.
I have a real problem with this government bailouts. Okay. It's your government, other government. It's a government. It's for political reasons, because he's very aligned to Trump politically. He's aligned to Israel. Those are the reasons. It's not being driven by individual sort of companies saying this is such a great place to invest.
It's maybe the geopolitics. And
geopolitics is very often the last reason for wanting to invest in a place. You might get a few companies who are close to the American government. They might want to come. Israel, I think bought the water utility, or one of the utilities. But those are signals of geopolitical interest, rather than, my God, this place is such a great
one for business. Yeah. Like you keep on mentioning Vietnam, for instance.
Vietnam is the greatest example. When it did the Doi Moi, it just cut tariffs immediately, allowed the currency to do, they just went for it in one go.
In one go, yeah. That's also very fun. I think थोड़ा सा पाकिस्तान के थोड़ा से बात कर सकते हैं कि हमने भी बड़ी रिफॉर्म्स अनाउंस की हैं. अभी गवर्नमेंट ने टैरिफ रिफॉर्म्स अनाउंस की हैं जो 5 साल में होंगी. फिर बिजनेस रेगुलेशंस के ऊपर रिफॉर्म्स अनाउंस की हैं जो काफ़ी वाइड रेंजिंग है. लेकिन टैक्स के उसके ऊपर कोई नहीं है. टैक्स बहुत ज़्यादा है, टैक्स रेट्स बहुत ज़्यादा है. करेंसी मार्केट्स हमारी भी एडमिनिस्ट्रेट ही चल रही है प्रैक्टिकली. तो वो I think what insight I'm drawing from your discussion is that you have to do it all holistically, comprehensively. Otherwise, and all these things are interconnected. You can't be piecemeal. You can't be incremental, actually. And you can't select like which area of reforms.
You either do it or don't do it at all.
Or don't do it.
And we will suffer, anyway.
So better suffer today and embrace for tomorrow.
And I think when you take the tough decisions, which are incredibly difficult, and then that's what you probably need the political will, or you have a dictatorship, whatever it is. In the case of Chile, they could take a lot of the tough decisions because it was a brutal dictatorship which has its own flaws. Yes, but or you have a democracy with in the case of Thatcher, whatever.
And also,
they had that kind of popular base where that sold the message effectively, and people were willing to take the difficulties. Unions were broken, state-owned companies were sold. There was monopolies were also, in the case of Reagan, broken, and there was considerable sort of pain in the United States. You had the entire Rust Belts, all businesses going out of fashion, iron, steel, all sort of automotive plants, etc. They're all basically being restructured and closed down. So and that led to unemployment, but they were willing to undergo that pain. You can't sort of say, if somehow the other, you can just gradually do these things without pain. But the pain has to be such that it's minimized to the most vulnerable classes.
Yes.
And that is where the trick comes in terms of politics.
I have another concern, and that is even this kind of bailout is going to work or not, because I was just reading, friendly comment, and the comment was that, there is a run on peso right now.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is, despite all the interventions and U.S. Bailout, they still run on peso. So why is that happening?
Because fundamentally, I think the market is saying it's overvalued. This 20 billion, how much do you need? You still have high levels of foreign debt. Remember the kind of foreign debt in Argentina is you have the kind of borrowing they had from the programs of IMF, not like ours, 6 billion, 7 billion. They have 40 billion, 50 billion. So just one. And then you have a number of bond issuance.
Yeah.
So you have very large.
It's the risk for the creditor to survive.
So there is, and moreover, the worst thing I think about this, you have the people with the money in the currency. They find very different ways. The currency markets found in the past various different ways of basically betting against the market by finding to take out the money out of the country. And even the most rich people did that.
Yeah.
So you basically, it's a self-defeating thing. And moreover, if you're going to announce to the public that we are going to be saved by America, that is probably one of the worst cases. And it is not 20 billion in an economy like Argentina is extremely helpful, but it's not going to be your savior. It would be there as a good boost, but as soon as that wears off, then the markets are again sliding. And as you said, I've not seen the recent peso prices, but I take your word for it that it's sliding again.
I think that's where we think there's even a stronger case for genuine reforms.
Yeah,
and
it can't be by half measures.
It can't be half measures, and that's the key message. Well, I guess we have covered a lot on ground, but if you want to add any more points here, which we have not covered.
I think the one point, I think the messaging of reforms are critically important. You also have to be very clear not to overpromise and underdeliver. So the promises by Milei were much greater, despite having achieved. But the one sort of central point, which was that he'll get rid of Central, probably that was always ill-conceived. Why go there?
Why promise?
Yeah. If it had been the plan, and really one can sort of look back at it, it's very difficult to say what would have worked. But if it could have been that he had said, I'm going to have the central bank, we are going to devalue initially, we are going to be very careful about it, and from there on it will be a certain managed depreciation. If that had been always embedded, and everyone knew that that is his plan and is working according to plan, it would have been might have been, I'm not saying will, so might have been a very different situation. So you come back, you panic, you start saying in April that you're completely removing any, but yet you are intervening in the markets. Confused signaling. And I think nothing spooks the markets more than confused signaling.
That's the bottom line here. Absolutely. A great discussion. Any thoughts on reforms in Pakistan currently, which you find worthy of comments right now? How do you see reforms here?
I think there's more talk than action.
Okay.
So what reforms? I was going to say, what is it that actually is taking place that is dramatically transforming the economic structures? Yeah, one of the worst things I feel about Pakistan is something which I've written about is creative destruction. If you think about it, just about every major economy sees a period where a large number of companies close down, new companies emerge, new industries emerge. In the last 30 years, have you seen many companies either close down or new industries emerge? It's virtually the same for the last 30 years. The same big companies, the same big conglomerates, they're forever there, they're forever there.
We do see a change, but that's for maybe a different reason altogether, and that's like the exit of multinationals in some sectors.
Well, that's hardly positive. So
that's not forced.
I mean, what you're not seeing is suddenly you're hearing, like you in the UK or where you had that, this term used creative destruction, where you have old theatre industry it's closing down. You're not having that in Pakistan. So I say that is the route to productivity gains. So my point is, what reforms? There's a lot of talk. To be honest, it's been the new regime, new government has been around in different phases, 3 years.
True.
What privatization has taken place?
Zero.
Tariff reforms, you talk about it. I know you personally looked at it very closely and you've written, and you have your own views on it. But in reality, how much have tariff dramatically fall for the end consumer products? I don't care about just the commodities because that's the easy way to do it. It's the end consumer products.
Yeah. No, mobiles are still expensive, and
That was the previous government, but I think most absurd tariffs in the world. We have probably the most expensive mobile phone anywhere in the world, and this is a basic utility for the common man.
Yeah. No,
I wonder why, because we want to preserve about 500 jobs for a foreign company here. Would we not be better off?
30,000 jobs, by the way.
Really? In mobile?
In the new assembly plants, yeah.
Really? Well, if I can stand corrected. But frankly speaking, what price are we paying? What are the individual?
Yeah, very, very heavy price. And then our import bill has increased, actually. The fundamental reason of this policy was bring down import bill on the import of mobile phones.
Yeah.
And since now we import parts, we actually end up spending more dollars.
Which is probably true in the auto assemblages, right, as well.
Exactly.
So the concerns, again, there is the same, that's the attitudes, because there's no real creative destruction, the same entrepreneurs at the end. So now we are going to have BYD assemblage. I want to know, what role does Pakistan have in assembling auto? What is the competitive advantage? Will we ever be competitively placed to sell BYDs from Pakistan?
I doubt that.
Do we have anything fundamentally such that makes us a place for competitive advantage in auto assemblage? Why do we need, in fact,
Why do we need to?
why do we need to have an auto industry? I mean, these are boring and I don't want to go on.
Yeah.
But these are really sort of simple questions people should ask, may sound almost stupid. That do we need an auto industry?
Yeah.
Do we need a mobile industry? Is it that critically important? Is it a strategic industry? I mean, that people sort of say strategic. I don't know, in modern world, is there any industry that is particularly strategic?
Unless those who are defining strategic have strategic interests.
I think even if so, it should be done publicly, and they should show why is it so strategic for us.
Right. Now, I think we should maybe do another conversation on creative destruction in the context of Pakistan. But I found that today's discussion very illuminating in the context of what's happening in Argentina. This is truly helpful, and I agree with you that these reforms have to be holistically and comprehensively pursued, and we should believe in the forces of market to actually deliver the results with its pitfalls. We should embrace it as a package.
Ali, you always reminded me, and I love that instruction you once said, because you wrote about Islam and economics and about fixed pricing.
That's right.
I'd love you to finish with that, because I found it so revealing, given my limited knowledge of these things.
Of course, yeah. I mean, one of the fundamental principles of the Islamic economic principle, as established by a prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, was actually no price control.
And the reasons for that was?
And the reason was that, this is against the idea of morality and justice and private property.
Yeah.
And
God doesn't want.
Exactly. And so the prices is something divine.
Yeah.
And it's only in the God's hand, kind of invisible. So that's actually the principle which I have also learned, and
which I don't know, it converted into the invisible
head. So there is probably some convergence there. But I'm glad that we talked about these issues, and you mentioned creative destruction. I'll do mention that Javed Hassan also writes his own Substack articles under creative destruction. Yeah. So please do subscribe to it and support independent writing. with that,
Thank
I
you so
thank
much, Ali, for having me. It was such great fun.
Javed, and we look forward to a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.